Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Quest for Kimchi by Raquel Look, narrated by Sarah Skaer. Part 1. Chapter 1. How It Started. "Senor! Slow down!" shouted Magda over the growling sound of the revved-up engine. "Si, senora," the driver answered, and I slid across the back seat as he rounded the corner. Why did I even agree to come anyway? Zigzagging across Rome, slipping and sliding in the back seat of a musty cab in a foreign land wasn't my idea of sightseeing. Our driver Pinocchio, or was it Antonio, had promised us the best scenic route, but he continued to zip past every single structure. Pinocchio was the more fitting name, I decided. At this pace, there was no opportunity to take in the majestic and historic sights, but every chance of getting a concussion. The driver blurred past a set of seemingly beautiful stairs, then zipped past what seemed to be a fountain. Fountains were everywhere in Rome. I thought we had just passed the Trevi fountain. Were those Roman gods bathing? Or important emperors posing in what looked like luminous lights, drowning them? How would I know? I thought dryly. I was being tenderized in the back seat by a goddamned Roman. I wish I had a coin to throw in there so I could wish for this cabbie to slow down. "Pantheon!" shouted the driver, before eventually rounding the ancient Colosseum with shrieking tires. Was that an ancient court? A recently excavated Italian market? Glancing backward in the rearview mirror, I managed to savor another millisecond of these historical landmarks, exactly what I had envisioned and seen in guidebooks. It felt like we were in some kind of gravitron-like time machine that tossed us from present day to 179 AD with ancient aqueducts all around. I was thrown onto Magda from my end of the back seat, and then thrown back again before we zipped past more ancient structures I didn't know the names of. We had been warned about the cabbies. "Mag, I don't feel so great." "I think we just passed this place," she whispered, seeming to ignore my last statement. "I think he's taking the long route, Rach. He's definitely ripping us off." "Mag," I complained again. "I want to throw up." We sped toward the middle of a dark and what looked to be abandoned alleyway, coming to a sudden stop. Both of us jerked forward. Magda was reluctant to get out, but I couldn't get out fast enough, almost tripping over the cobblestones in my haste. No sooner had I exited the taxi, my arms folded over my constricted stomach and my body hunched over, than I gagged uncontrollably. We both turned our heads to look at the audibly laughing cabbie. I had known this trip wasn't such a good idea. I'd been nervous to come to Italy. Not only was it outside my comfort zone, but I had read about petty crime and pickpocketing, and I didn't understand a word of Italian. Except for maybe ciao, which was useless when I really wanted to say, "Stop driving so fast, you lunatic!" But when my college roommate Magda invited me to go to Italy with her, something about it being a magical place that awoke your inner soul, which prompted her to buy 2 round-trip airfare tickets. How could I say no? Plus, I needed a desperate getaway from work. Was I that unhappy at the law firm? I pondered, and then answered myself immediately. Yes. Yes, I was. I should have been happy with such a prestigious job. My peers were. Lynch and Burnham, LLP only accepted the top of the top from the Ivy League universities for their entry-level program, and I got in? I had secretly hoped I wouldn't, since I was becoming unhappy with my life. At the core of it was this job that erupted all sorts of damaging, volcanic ash into my life. Regret, anxiety, insomnia, backaches, even carpal tunnel. Partners and bosses who simply expected you to give up life to serve them their documents in their corner suites while they overzealously billed their clients by the hour and paid you 1/4 of the 1/4 billed amount. As if suffocating from the dense ash of legal work wasn't bad enough, my college sweetheart, Nate, had texted me earlier in the week while I was redacting documents for one of the largest corporate scandals in U.S. history. The text had read, "We need to take a break," which felt like the biggest scandal of my premature love life. We need to take a break? What the hell did that mean? There was no elaboration, just 18 characters emitted into the universe that damaged my heart, like an 18.0 magnitude earthquake, crushing the ash still erupting from that aforementioned volcano. Was the "we need to take a break" followed by a measurable, quantifiable metric of time? I had more questions that began with, "Huh? What? Why?" I needed an explanation. I needed to understand this statement, and I needed to know why he couldn't call me. Nate and I met the first week of college. During orientation, he was trying to find his dorm room and accidentally ended up at mine, comfortably unpacking his belongings onto my desk. It was a co-ed dorm room with co-ed bathrooms, and room 410 looked like 416. "Hi, I'm Rachel. We corresponded over the summer," I said, not even looking up and opening another jar of the spicy cabbage my mom had so neatly packed for me. "What's that smell?" He paused, putting his nose up in the air to take another sniff. His canvas bag dropped off his shoulder. "It's kimchi," I answered, reaching for a plastic fork and scooping a little bit from the jar. I handed it to him. "What's kimchi?" he asked, pulling away. I rattled off what sounded like a Webster Dictionary definition of the vegetable. It's a traditional side dish made from salted and fermented vegetables, most commonly Napa cabbage and Korean radishes, with a variety of seasonings including chili powder, scallions, garlic, ginger, and gyotto, salted seafood. Nate finally leaned in, face puckered, as he put the fork into his mouth. A little dropped off the side of his mouth. "That's the most disgusting thing I've ever eaten." I could go on and on about the most disgusting things I've ever eaten. Anchovies, blue cheese, mutton, crickets, pig feet, chicken feet, intestines, fish eggs, and ketchup on Doritos. Instead, I kept a polite face and only grinned. "Is this sweet 410? I'm Nate." He struggled to swallow the last bit of kimchi. He flashed a smile, and an unusually long canine tooth protruded from the side with a piece of kimchi on it. At that very moment, my real roommate, Magda Kim, arrived. She was donned in a baggy, dark tracksuit, walked in, dropped her 2 big duffel bags to the floor, and let out a hostile, "Who the hell are you?" directed at Nate. "And what the hell is that smell?" Our eyes met. "You must be Rachel C.," she said, as she moved forward, her shoulders brushing Nate's arm. Nate's real dorm room was down the hall. After that incident, Nate and I spent almost every day of college together, to Magda's chagrin. We were that couple other couples snarked at under their breaths to get a room because of all the embarrassing public displays of affection that would be totally acceptable in a place like Paris. We endured the tragedy of all-nighters together, studying subjects neither of us really cared for at the student union. We rushed Greek life during the same semester and moved into the respective fraternity, sorority organizations across the street from each other on Thornston Avenue. Nate and I became more unified, vowing to be do-gooders, whatever that meant, for the rest of our lives. We stopped eating out. With the rice cooker in my dorm room and the packaged spicy cabbage I still had, Nate frequently came over. He learned to love kimchi, or at least to tolerate it. "I can't eat this anymore, Rach," Magda complained. She didn't like kimchi, which was odd since she grew up with this stuff. She had a mom and a grandmother who spent summers teaching her how to make kimchi under the perfect temperature conditions. I wasn't as fortunate. My Chinese family preferred their futile attempts at making me memorize Chinese vocabulary during the summers. "Please, Magda, will you share your family's unwavering devotion and kimchi recipe with me?" "No," she would tell me, eyes welling up. She opened the door and left us for the evening. Finally, the room to ourselves. I can't stand her. Nate moved closer to me. I opened my chemistry book to the chapter I was struggling with. "I love you, Rach," he said suddenly. My focus was lost, and I hesitantly looked up into his unapologetic eyes. And just like that, I felt the whoosh of air as his body approached mine. I'd never imagined our first kiss to be filled with kimchi-smelling breaths, but it was. And it was perfect. Every beat of my heart increased, and everything in the world seemed to freeze, like we were the only ones left in the world. The following semester, we adopted our little hamster, Jimmy Choo, together and moved off campus, followed by a kitten named Miss America. I even met Nate's family. I'll never forget the first words Grandma Lucetta said to me. "You don't look like a slut." A month earlier, she had driven almost 250 miles in an '86 Chevy by herself to drop us off food because she didn't think we were eating well. We weren't. "What the hell is that smell?" she said, barging into our dorm room. She was holding a heavy cooler of homemade Italian, which was as fresh as any food could be after the 4-hour trip. "Grandma, it's kimchi." Nate moved the jar close to her. "Gum who? It smells like an elephant just died in here. Get rid of that stuff." I took the jar from Nate and closed it. I couldn't believe I was letting this stranger who knew nothing about kimchi tell me what to do with my favorite comfort food. "Now here, have some real food." Grandma Lucetta opened the cooler and pulled out carefully wrapped lasagnas, meatballs, ravioli, and caprese salads. It was the most nourishing food we had all semester. It surprisingly tasted good, and for a fleeting moment, I forgot about my kimchi. Grandma Lucetta would continue to take regular road trips to see us and make us, quote-unquote, real food that rivaled the delicious spicy cabbage. After college, Nate and I moved to New York City. He worked in banking, and I worked in corporate law. Admittedly, we each began growing more distant, but I attributed that to our intense, 7 days a week, quote-unquote, important jobs. He thrived on the stress and hard-earned 6-figure bonuses that followed the large corporate deals he helped ink, the same ones I would soon come to despise. Meanwhile, I seemed to spiral into a sad, quote-unquote, Rachel state and emit a toxic aura whenever someone we encountered asked, "What do you do for a living?" My response was almost always pleasant and politically correct, but whoever was asking seemed to sense the true toxicity of that response, which really reeked of, I hate my job. I hate my life. Nonetheless, I never would have expected the way I felt about a job to warrant a quote-unquote break from Nate, whatever the hell that meant. But I certainly needed a break from all this, and so I gave Magda a reassuring, "Yes, I will join you in Italy," especially since she got a good deal on what was now a non-refundable ticket. The cabbie pointed straight ahead into the depth of a narrow, dark alley and proclaimed in heavily Italianized and broken English, "It would have been the most bellissimo of places." There was nobody else around, and I felt scared. He saluted us by jointly placing his index and forefingers to his lips, then extending his arms with fingers pointing toward us and making an all-too-familiar sound, "Ah!" I heard him mutter the word "Americans" as he sped off. "Are you okay?" Magda asked nervously. "I'll be all right," I said, trying hard to believe myself. I could barely muster up the words between each gasp. "I just need to catch my breath. What a maniac!" I stood upright and composed myself, breathing a bit more calmly. I stretched my arms, and we began to sheepishly walk toward the alley. The alley between the two ancient buildings grew narrower toward the intersection of what may have been either another alley, a dead end, or the unlikely intersection of another street. I prayed to Pope John Paul II. Antonio the cabbie had said it was around the corner, but failed to mention in which direction. Were we supposed to interpret his instructions by the motion of his well-defined, sleeveless and hairy dark arm? We took what we thought was a wrong turn until we found a barely lit yellowish button adorning the right side of the doorframe and a bronze 3-inch number 8 nailed on the door at eye level for a child. We had arrived. We pressed the button with some remaining hesitation, and a flamboyantly dressed young Italian dandy greeted us with an operatic baritone voice. "Benvenuto! Welcome! Michines bellas! Come! Sit! Eat!" he roared. As a Korean American, Magda usually took offense to being called Chinese, but for some reason, she had a forgiving look on her face. "Oh my gosh, he's hot, Rachel, so hot." "I'm guessing that's why you weren't offended by what he called you?" "He could call me whatever he'd like," she whispered. And then he placed his arm around us both and escorted us in. "Have you seen those arms?" she added. To our pleasant and relieved surprise, we were brought to the back of a large room with a spectacular vaulted ceiling, full of gregarious patrons, most of whom were speaking some dialect of Italian or another. "Our special today is il bistec. You like the steak?" "Magda, I don't want steak. We're in Italy. How about something more Italian, like mac and cheese?" "You must try the meats here, Rach." Fine, just order." Our poorly manicured and unshaven waiter dispensed the menus and promptly placed fresh homemade focaccia bread with Parmigiano Reggiano chunks and a bowl of large green and black olives at the center of the table. Oh my God, it was unlike any Italian restaurant either of us had been to in the United States. This tasted as if it was just made by a short, medium-plumped, lovely Italian grandmother. Shortly thereafter, Magda picked a variety of foods, including a parade of buffalo burrata, a sampling of a variety of local handmade pastas, slow-cooked wild game from the Italian Alps, and the appropriate Montepulciano d'Abruzzo. Our waiter took charge with his Italian machismo in a full peacock-like display, along with his surprisingly bare chest peeking through his mostly unbuttoned collared shirt. "Magda, I can't eat anymore. I'm about to burst," I said. "We are in Italy, Rachel. Italy. Eating real Italian food, cooked by real Italians." Magda won again, and we gluttonously ate more than what our waistlines permitted, necessitating the unfastening of our jeans and, I joked, applications to The Biggest Loser upon our return to the United States. Our waiter, along with our vivacious friend who greeted us at the door, told us the covert establishment belonged to his family and that we were in the presence of the brothers Vincenzo and Aldo. "Our very fabled recipes are passed from generation to generation from our very large and old familia. Madre and Nonna would be so angry if we no take over. My Nonna source and simmer the ingredients all slowly for many hours, and we don't open the restaurant until all the food is ready. Usually around 1 o'clock in the afternoon," one of them proudly exclaimed. "Rachel, this is typical of southern Italy, but unusual for Rome," Magda exclaimed. "We've hit an Italian food served by hot Roman brothers gem." I believed her. There were so many obvious signs this was not a tourist trap, nor is it for the impatient traveler. There weren't any English menus, and we had to rely on Aldo's elementary English that sounded more like Italian to me. Even so, I loved being serenaded by the conversations of gregarious patrons surrounding us, like we were in the audience of their Opera di Verona performance, still going strong hours later. Several hours later, we were under the psychedelic influence of a vino stupor. We laughed hard with our newly formed friends, as though we were alone and had shared many fond memories together. Soon joining our festivities was a lovely Irish couple who sounded like they spoke 100 words a minute. "Holy Jesus, Mary and Joseph, what are you birds drinking? It looks like you're having a grand time. Where's our lad Mario? Luigi, refill." Aldo, or was it Vincenzo, came over and soon brought the group downstairs to the cavernous and gloomy wine cellar, complete with the prerequisite amount of mangled, aging cobwebs amidst the hundreds of neatly shelved, dust-covered bottles. There were vintage wines, new wines, wines from his family estate. The collection was simply breathtaking. It was also damp and cool, and smelled of an equal mixture of fermenting, overly ripe fruit, and mold. The Irish couple danced around a bit. Is this what the Irish like to do? I wondered. They asked us to take their picture, mumbling in their heavy accents. "Would you take a photo of us? Make sure you get the grand bottles of wine in the background. Me wife here, she's a lush." Were we asked because we were Asian? How about asking the Italian fellow instead? I wondered. They were kind enough to reciprocate, but the pictures were blurred. "Thanks a million!" Upon returning to our table with 2 different wine bottles in tow and a corked, half-full bottle of grappa, Italian moonshine, or was it Italian oil paint thinner, we laughed some more and exchanged stories. Rachel here was too nervous to come to Italy. I practically had to lure her with free tickets. Magda balked. The Irish gentleman laughed. "Me name is Phat McGraugan." He slipped towards the edge of the seat. "Nervous? What's there to be nervous about? You're in there tried me wife's cooking. Aye, that's something to be nervous about." After drinking some more, we rummaged through our purses and gave them our business cards, something we should have given them in the first place. They reciprocated. One read, Claire McGraugan, Head of Recruiting, Wilheltech Commerce, GmbH, East Point Business Park, Dublin 3, Ireland. Chapter 2. But... Come on! Email her already! Magda wailed from her yoga mat, fidgeting as she tried to balance herself on one foot. Meanwhile, I was trying hard to ignore her and focus on Jillian's vinyasa yoga class. If everyone can transcend into a child's pose and take deep breaths. It was cold for a spring day in New York City. Barely even 40 degrees outside, but inside the studio, it was a sweltering combobulation of 100 degrees of sauna-like heat exacerbated by stings of instigation from Magda that came at me sideways. It was a new style of yoga. Bikram yoga, they called it. And Magda insisted we just had to try it, mentioning that the heat would stimulate our metabolisms and enable more body fat loss. Email Claire, Magda insisted, now clumsily shuffling into a downward dog pose, her head upside down now, peering in between her bent legs toward me and howling back as 5 other women surrounding us began giving her dirty looks. She's the head of recruiting at her firm, Rach. She could potentially get you out of your hellhole, Magda continued. No, I can't. I won't, I responded, letting out a deep exhale. My glasses were fogging up. Email her, Magda exclaimed in a more aggressive tone. One woman stood up at this point, rolled her mat up, and moved to the opposite end of the room, clearly annoyed as she let out a passive-aggressive grunt. Jillian didn't seem to mind the commotion. After all, classes were $85 per person. Jillian reached for the window and tried to open it, but the knob was still broken. It opened only slightly, and a burst of humidity exited. No, I won't, I resisted, in a slightly more aggressive tone this time. I bent forward with my hands touching my toes. I focused on my breathing, closed my eyes, and remained calm. Email her! Tell her how lovely it was to meet her and her partner! Magda's cantankerous voice grew louder and soon muffled Jillian's instructions. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and bent backwards into a bridge position. No, I don't know her. What did you expect me to get out of this, Mag? A job in Ireland? The humidity allowed me to flex even further backwards. I was tipsy when you and I exchanged contact information with her. I wouldn't even know where her contact info was, I said on an exhale. You need to get out of your shell, Rachel. Be comfortable, Magda yelled. I abhor when you get like this. Somewhere, lost in my luggage that was stowed away from our trip to Italy last year in the deep furrows of my cluttered closet, maybe was her business card. I took a deep exhale and closed my eyes, trying to follow Jillian as she positioned her body into a bridge. All your life, you've been taught to be submissive, to listen to authority. I took a deep breath, trying hard not to succumb to the pressure Magda was sending my way in the middle of yoga class. To never question anyone, to never speak up, to color in between the lines. Jillian stood up on her mat. I followed. To never do anything different, to accept, to study, to work, to care for others first, to put Nate first. I moved my head slowly in the opposite direction, blocking out any negative energy that attacked me by way of Magda's words. To never go to bed without first brushing your teeth for exactly 2 minutes and 20 seconds. The obsequious one. Never one to socialize. I loudly exhaled this time. I hated when Magda got like this. She was the best friend you loved and hated all at once. The one you wanted to wrap and embrace before choking to death. the one who slapped you with the harshest dose of reality, and you suffered from whiplash.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?